Okay, so today's video is going to be even shorter. There's not really much to say that hasn't already been said, other than the fact that today I'm going through the process of putting everything back together. Yesterday I got everything cleaned off as much as I'm going to clean it off. You don't want to get too overzealous with cleaning the mating surfaces of these things, your heads and your engine block and all that kind of stuff. If you create scratches or gouges or any minute scratches, as a matter of fact, from using steel wool or even a Scotch-Brite pad, if you get too overzealous with it, definitely the sandpaper. I don't recommend sandpaper. If you've got an old engine, I'm talking about something from the 60s or 70s, some of the 80s stuff. You can use some very, very fine grit sandpaper, and you can even spray some WD-40 on there while you're sanding it. But any of this newer stuff, it's not a good idea. If you're really that concerned with the mating surfaces, and when I say that, I mean putting one metal surface against another metal surface with the gasket in between, you're going to have to go and get it machined. The problem with getting stuff machined, and what most people don't realize, is machine shops are very, very backed up. That's something that I've heard everywhere. You're going to be waiting for your parts for a little while. I've got a pair of heads for my '04 Dodge that have been sitting at the machine shop now for 6 weeks. They told me 2 at the maximum. So, but from what I've heard, it's kind of common. Maybe not that long, but a week, 2, whatever. And honestly, unless you have something that's warped or extremely out of being straight and flat, you don't need to do all that. It gives you a better peace of mind. But unless you've got a race car or something that you're planning on putting through a bunch of stress, it's really not necessary. As long as you take everything off the way you're supposed to and you put everything back on the way you're supposed to and torque it to the correct specs. The gaskets and the seals and things like that are there to take care of small differences in the two surfaces. That's the whole point. And this is what I'm talking about. It's clean to an extent. This is as clean as I could get it with using brake cleaner and things like that to get the surface cleaned off. Did some very, 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 very light scraping with a razor blade. I didn't like doing that, but I don't have a plastic scraper. So what I did is I just used a razor blade, but very lightly scraped it. Everything's been smoothed out. I mean, it may not look like it because there's a lot of staining. That's what this is. This is staining from the previous gasket and carbon and oil and whatever. But it's very smooth. It's been cleaned several times. This side's not as bad because this side's head gasket wasn't in very bad shape. That side's got more staining and everything else because the head gasket was going bad. But yeah, everything's been cleaned off. I'm putting it back together today. Another thing with your oil pump, I looked this oil pump over. It seems like it's in really good condition, so I'm not going to change it out. But if you were going to change your oil pump, now would be the time that you would do it. If you're gonna have the timing plate off and the oil pan off, this is when you would change your oil pump. Most oil pumps are largely mechanical the crankshaft spins, and when the crankshaft spins, it spins some gears that are inside of your oil pump that create the oil pressure that your engine needs. So as long as you haven't sucked any metal shards up in through your pickup tube, or any large plastic chunks, or you haven't starved the engine with oil, your pump's probably going to be all right, honestly. I know it seems kind of crazy that they decided to put the oil pump in a place where you have to basically take the whole motor apart to get to it, but it's because they don't tend to fail unless you've already done something else really bad to your engine, like not putting oil in it or allowing it to get extremely overheated, which then causes valve seats to drop, or your bearings in your motor, which are down here. Okay, so you have rod bearings that are in these rod caps that are in between the surface of the crankshaft and the rod that pushes the piston head up and down. And then you have main bearings all along here. Yep, that's another one. And there's another one. And there's another one. There's bearings that are in between those that make it to where you're not supposed to have the metal touching the crankshaft. It's supposed to be the bearing metal touching the crankshaft, and it's supposed to be oiled. But if you starve your engine of oil, then those bearings can start to get really worn out, and they'll eventually spin. If you've ever heard anybody say anything about a spun bearing, that's when those bearings just they spin around inside of these caps. And you're talking about some pretty serious damage at that point. A spun bearing on a rod will cause rod knock if your engine doesn't blow up first. And then spun bearing on a main bearing will cause the crankshaft to be able to move back and forth and up and down, and then all of a sudden you're these things are these are weights right here. I forget the technical name right now, but this is a weight that helps with the balancing of the crankshaft, right? And when your main bearings go out, these things can hit your caps to the rods, or they can even hit the bottom of the piston head. And those are all very, very bad things. That's the kind of stuff that blows up your motor, which can almost always be prevented by making sure you're always keeping your engine oiled. Fresh oil and enough of it. This is probably not going to adjust enough to be able to see it. There it goes. So that's the screen for your pickup tube for your oil. If there was any bearing damage, there'd be metal all up in that, and there would be metal that comes out of your oil filter, and there would be a chance to have metal in your oil pan. Just dropped that. That was great. It's the benefit of doing everything in one take. But there, you'd see little pieces of metal in there, and this isn't metal. This is just chunky dirt, old oil, whatever. That's normal. But if there was pieces of metal in it, it would look like you basically put glitter in your oil. The best way I can describe it to somebody that doesn't know anything about this is imagine a glitter pen. When you look at the inside of the glitter pen, especially if you do like a dark gray glitter pen, it looks basically just like that. If you just poured the dark gray glitter pen into your oil. It's very obvious. Another thing that you can look at for your oil, I mean, and you'll see this stuff when you go to change the oil too. If you change your own oil, obviously. If you go to empty your oil and your oil is extremely discolored, it normally means that your head gasket is bad and your coolant is mixing with your oil. When I drained the oil out of this, the oil was green. Green. Not black, not brown, green. Which basically means that the head gasket had started to go bad. The coolant was going into the oil, and it had enough time to completely break down the coolant and tint the oil green like the coolant was. If you let it go for too long, it will start to turn milky. That's whenever it's broken the coolant down so much that in the oil pan or in the filter, sometimes you can even find it in the oil fill neck. There'll be what looks like nasty curdled milk or like a yogurt kind of consistency, and it's like it's a white color, and that's whenever it's separated enough, it's been in there long enough and it's separated from being hot and everything else that it's separating the oil, it's separating the coolant, and that's also a sign. And you'll see this kind of stuff whenever you take your drain plug out. Your technicians at oil places are supposed to be telling you these things. That's why you should take your vehicle to get the oil changed at a place that you trust. Not Walmart. Not Walmart. As an adult, you'll learn that there's, just because you can do some stuff doesn't mean that you should. And one of those things is, unless you know the technician that works at Walmart personally and you know that they're going to not mess things up for you, don't get your oil changed at Walmart. I would even venture to say don't get your oil changed at Pep Boys, but Pep Boys is going out of business pretty much anyway, so most of you probably don't get your oil changed at Pep Boys. But some people from the 90s and early 2000s will remember how bad it could have been if you got your oil changed at Pep Boys. I'm talking about places that have had lawsuits, guys. But yeah, take your vehicle to a trusted place. Valvoline, Jiffy Lube, there's just different places, even your local place. If you know the guys or ladies that work there and you trust them, get your oil changed somewhere like that, to where that way whenever they take this plug out, if you've got bright and shinies in your oil, or you've got curdled milk looking stuff in your oil, they'll tell you, and you don't have any reason not to believe them because you trust them. And then that means you need to fix something soon. Don't put it off. I know people don't have the money to do things, but I'm telling you, if you ignore those signs in your oil pan, or you're not changing your oil on a regular basis, and you're taking too long between oil changes, your engine will fail. And now all of a sudden you're talking about going from a job that, yeah, it may have cost you $1,000, $1,500 between parts and paying your mechanic and everything else to change out your bearings in your engine, or your head gasket in your engine. All of a sudden now you gotta get a new engine. And that's if whenever your engine failed, it didn't cause problems for your transmission, because I got news for you guys. When they fail that catastrophically, they vibrate, they move, it's very violent sometimes. Things blow out the side of your engine block. It affects your transmission. So now not only do you have to buy a new motor to get installed, but you're going to have to pay somebody to inspect your transmission to make sure it's not ruined, and then probably get a remanufactured one or rebuild it for you. You're now in the area of, as long as you don't have an emotional attachment to this car, you might as well buy another one, another used vehicle, all because you weren't getting your oil changed on a regular basis and you weren't taking it to a place that you trusted. So you weren't able to see the warning signs, or you weren't paying attention to the warning signs, which is change your oil, mind your coolant. A lot of these vehicles that have overhead cams, there's a valve seat on these things, and then I'm trying really hard not to let this go too long. Really trying. So back behind here, and it's too dirty to really tell. I don't even know if I'm gonna get enough light to do this. But back behind here, there's a valve seat. It's basically just a ring. It's a ring that goes around the hole right behind the valve. And in an aluminum head, those seats, those rings, are not aluminum most of the time, if at all. I'm not sure. I'm not 100%. But what happens when your engine overheats, the metal expands and contracts, and eventually that seat will fall out, and your valve will go to open, and it'll shoot that metal into your piston and punch holes all in the piston and the cylinder wall and everything. Absolutely ruin the motor because it overheated. Some vehicles, if you don't fill the coolant correctly, will get air pockets in it, and even though your dash tells you that you're not overheating, it's because it's not reading those air pockets. They move too quickly through the motor, but not quickly enough that it doesn't affect your head. That air pocket is basically just quickly hot, cold, 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 and eventually you'll drop a valve seat. So make sure the coolant is right, that it's the right amount of coolant in it, and make sure that there's no air pockets in the coolant, and change the oil. If you do those things, your motor is going to last a very long time, unless you're being really hard to it. I have several friends that love boost, love turbo vehicles, love supercharged vehicles, and like to put a little bit too much boost into their motor. But that's a whole different conversation. Y'all know who you are. Hey, some people like to put their engine through the paces because they love to drive their vehicle, they love to race their vehicle. There ain't nothing wrong with that. It just means that you're going to be working on it more. But if you're the regular, everyday, average driver, and this is your daily vehicle, and you just keep the oil changed when it's supposed to, right levels, same thing with the coolant, right levels, and not tap water. People stop putting tap water in your motor. Don't put tap water in there. It is not meant to go in your radiator. Don't put tap water in your radiator. Yes, I know they sell coolant that you can mix yourself. That is for distilled water. It's cheap at the grocery store. Do not put tap water in your motor. Don't do that. That is the easiest way to destroy your engine. Tap water has all kinds of crap in it that's going to eat away at the metal inside your motor, especially aluminum, and it's going to make holes, and those holes are going to leak coolant, and it's going to destroy your motor because you put tap water in it. I know Grandpa used to be able to get away with that kind of stuff, but that was for vehicles that didn't have a whole lot of aluminum, right? And the parts were probably not as expensive to replace. Don't put tap water in your motor.